Monday morning. A high school classroom in Palo Alto, California. The year is 1967. 22 years have passed since the end of the Second World War, and a group of teenagers are sitting in history class staring at black and white photographs of the Holocaust. One of them raises her hand. "How did it happen?" she asks. How could ordinary German people, teachers, doctors, neighbors, just go along with it? How could they watch what was happening and not resist? It is one of the most important questions in modern history, and their teacher, Ron Jones, finds himself unable to give a satisfying answer. He's explained the propaganda. He's covered the economic despair of Weimar Germany. He's talked about fear and intimidation. His students nod politely. But the question behind the question, the one she's really asking, thought is the one that keeps circling back. Could it happen to us? Could we have done the same? Ron Jones decides he's not going to answer that question with a lecture. He's going to prove it with an experiment. What unfolds over the next 5 days is one of the most chilling, fascinating, and deeply human stories in the entire history of psychology. It wasn't conducted in a laboratory. It wasn't written up in a journal. It happened in a real school with real children in the middle of an ordinary week in April. And by Friday, it had grown from a classroom exercise into a movement with over 200 members, complete with its own salute, its own motto, its own secret police, and its own terrifying momentum. Welcome back to the darkest experiments. We've already watched ordinary people administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to strangers. We've watched trained nurses nearly overdose patients on the instruction of a voice on the phone. We've been sitting with the uncomfortable truth that obedience to authority runs deeper in all of us than we want to admit. Now we go one step further. Because what Milgram showed us about individuals and what Hoffling showed us about institutions, the third wave shows us about communities. About belonging. About what happens when obedience stops feeling like submission and starts feeling like pride. This is not a story about monsters. It is a story about people who felt, for the first time in their lives, that they were part of something extraordinary. And that is the most frightening thing about it. The date is Monday, April 3rd, 1967. Ron Jones is a young, idealistic history teacher at Cubberley High School in Palo Alto, a progressive, well-educated suburb of Silicon Valley. His students are bright, curious, and largely from comfortable middle-class backgrounds. These are not disillusioned or disadvantaged kids. They are the children of engineers and academics. They are precisely the kind of people who, if you asked them, would say with total confidence that they would never fall for fascism. After that one student's question stops him in his tracks, Jones goes home that night and thinks. And the next morning, he walks into class with a plan. He doesn't tell his students what he's about to do. He doesn't explain the experiment. He simply begins it. Monday. Jones tells the class that they are going to spend the week exploring the concept of discipline. He starts by reorganizing the room. Desks are pushed into straight, formal rows. Students are told to sit upright, hands flat on the desk. When answering a question, they must stand beside their seat, address the teacher in a full sentence, and sit back down promptly. At first, some students smirk. This feels strange, theatrical, slightly ridiculous. But something happens within the first 30 minutes that Jones does not entirely expect. The class becomes sharper, more focused, more responsive. Students who rarely participated are raising their hands. The room has an energy to it, a crispness, that Jones had never felt before. Students seem to genuinely enjoy the structure. It makes them feel capable, precise, part of something well-organized. By the end of Monday, Jones has introduced a class motto, strength through discipline. The students repeat it back to him without hesitation. Tuesday, Jones expands the motto, strength through discipline, strength through community. He introduces the idea that this class and this group is special, that they are not just individual students but a unified movement. He designs a salute, a curved hand raised to the right shoulder like a wave breaking. He calls it the third wave salute, a symbol that the movement always builds, always grows, always moves forward. Students greet each other with it in the hallways. He tells them they are part of something bigger, that this group has a purpose, that belonging to it means something, that not everyone can be part of it, only those who are committed, disciplined, and loyal. The students are not just engaged now. They are electrified. By Tuesday afternoon, students from other classes are peering through the classroom window asking to join. Some are let in, others are told there will be a process. The exclusivity only intensifies the appeal. Jones notices something else. Students are beginning to monitor each other, not because they've been told to, but because they want to. They want the group to stay pure. They want the rules followed. A student who slouches is corrected by a classmate before Jones can say a word. He has not created obedience. He has created ownership. By Wednesday, the movement has taken on a life of its own. Jones introduces membership cards. He prints them during his lunch break. Simple cards, but they carry enormous symbolic weight. Most are stamped with an ordinary mark. A few are marked with a red X. Those select individuals are given a special role to observe and report on members who fail to live by the group's principles. Students report their classmates, not reluctantly, enthusiastically. One student approaches Jones to tell him that another has been speaking critically of the third wave outside school. The informer is not coerced. He is proud. Jones watches this unfold and feels for the first time a cold ripple of something that is not excitement. It is unease. But he continues. On Thursday, the movement has grown to over 200 students. Word has spread beyond the classroom, beyond the school. A football player who has barely attended class all year shows up. Older students arrive. A student offers to serve as Jones's personal bodyguard and walks behind him between classes. Jones, to his later admission, finds himself liking it. He had intended this as a 5-day lesson, but by Thursday, it no longer feels like a lesson. It feels like something real. And that distinction between performance and reality has quietly, completely dissolved for most of the participants. Friday morning, Jones tells the assembled group, now over 200 strong, packed into the school's auditorium, that the third wave is not just a classroom experiment. It is part of a national movement, and today a television announcement will be made revealing a new national youth program that the third wave is part of. A new leader will be announced. The room is electric with anticipation. Students are sitting in perfect silence. The salute is raised. The mottos are being whispered with reverence. Jones turns on a television screen at the front of the room. There is nothing on it, just static. He lets the silence stretch, and then he tells them the truth. There is no national movement. There is no leader. There is no television announcement. The third wave is over. It was a history lesson about Nazi Germany, and each of them just lived it from the inside. He shows them footage of the Nuremberg rallies. The similarities, the salutes, the mob energy, the ideological purity, the informers, the uniformity are not subtle. They are exact. The room does not erupt in noise. It goes very, very quiet. Several students begin to cry. Some refuse to believe what they're being told. Others leave without speaking. Jones later wrote that what hit him hardest was not the students who were upset. It was the few who were simply embarrassed, who had recognized something in themselves over those 5 days and didn't want to look at it. Jones never published a formal academic paper on the third wave. He was not a researcher. He was a teacher who had improvised his way into one of the most striking social demonstrations in educational history, and who was shaken enough by what he had witnessed that he chose to write about it in personal terms rather than clinical ones. His account has been adapted into films, a German movie, a novel, and is taught in schools around the world. Students who participated have spoken about it for decades, some with gratitude for the insight it gave them, some with lasting unease about how fully they had been absorbed by it. What makes the third wave different from Milgram and Hoffling is this. The participants were not following orders. Nobody was forcing them. Nobody was threatening them. They were choosing enthusiastically, joyfully, to be part of something. That is the lesson that history keeps trying to teach us. Authoritarianism does not always arrive as a boot on a throat. Often it arrives as a community, as a sense of meaning, as the feeling of finally belonging to something worthy of your loyalty and your sacrifice. And that feeling, it turns out, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. The third wave does not tell us that people are stupid or gullible. Jones's students were neither. It tells us that human beings have a deep, ancient, legitimate need for community, purpose, and belonging, and that this need can be satisfied in ways that are healthy and ennobling, or ways that are destructive and dehumanizing. The difference, most of the time, comes down to a few critical questions. Does this group encourage you to think independently, or does it punish independent thought? Does it make you more compassionate toward outsiders or more hostile? Does it require you to silence your doubts as a proof of loyalty? When belonging requires you to stop questioning, it is no longer community. It is a trap. The third wave also teaches us something about what Jones did on Friday morning, the reveal. He gave his students a mirror. He let them see themselves clearly. And as uncomfortable as that moment was, it was also one of the most genuinely educational moments any of those young people ever experienced. That willingness to look clearly at ourselves, at what we are capable of, under the right conditions with the right framing, is not a sign of weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. Ron Jones went to work on Monday morning intending to answer a question. He ended up living inside the answer for 5 days. The question was, how could ordinary people go along with fascism? The third wave answered it with devastating simplicity. They go along because it feels good, because it feels like strength and discipline and community and purpose, because it fills something that was empty, because the salute feels like belonging. And once you understand that, once you really let that land, history stops being a story about other people in other times and starts being a mirror you carry everywhere you go. Next time, we leave the classroom and descend into a basement at Stanford University, where a group of student volunteers are about to discover that you don't need to be evil to do terrible things. You just need to be given a uniform and a role in 6 days. That is the Stanford Prison Experiment, and it is waiting for you in the next episode. If the third wave moved you, challenged you, or made you think about your own group memberships differently, I want to hear about it in the comments. These conversations matter. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.